Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Julie Hirt. I'm a certified soul level animal communicator and certified soul level intuitive coach, and I love books. And this is another book video. So today we're going to talk about this book. Oops, it's getting reflected by the window. The Age of Deer by Erica Houseware. This came out in January, I believe, and I got it from my library, my local library, and the subtitle is Trouble and Kinship with Our Wild Neighbors. And I got this book because where I live here in Michigan, I have a lot of deer around me. So much so, in fact, that we actually we bought a game camera not too long ago, so we could watch, because they tend to come up to the house after we're asleep. I have rhododendrons and hydrangea bushes, and they like to nibble on those. And I also have an apple tree and a cherry tree in my yard and whatnot. So they're around a lot, and I'm fascinated by how they interact with us, how they are in the preserve. You know, Lucas likes to chase them and everything. So I'm very fascinated by deer. And I learned a lot from this book. I thought I was going to learn a little bit more about their behavior. Actually, what I learned about was a lot about their history on this continent, as well as the interactions of humans and how our species has impacted theirs, and how we are not as mindful as many of us probably believe. Our mindlessness towards not only one another, as far as myself to another human being, but also our mindlessness with how we treat other cultures, how we treat the planet, how we treat other species. All this all plays into the deer being a symbol for all of that. The book I found to be really well written, very enjoyable, if you will. I am really very much about right now looking at and reading stories that change the perception of how we thought. So the last book video I did was Rediscovery of America by Ned Blackhawk, which was a new telling of history, a re-examination of history, and what all we've not been taught, we being white people, what all we've not been taught about the Native American role. We know to some degree, some of us know the persecution that Native Americans faced, but we don't know all the ways that Native Americans even contributed. Like, none of that is talked about or celebrated. I also referenced in that video Stamped from the Beginning by Dr. Ibram Kendi. And there's also another book, Cast, from Isabel Wilkerson. All of those books tell a retelling or a new story or a new point of view about how things transpired. And this is in that group. It just happens to be about a different species. It's a very different way of looking at, like I said, a very different way of looking at deer. So one thing that's talked about in this book is about management of deer. And I've struggled as an animal communicator. I have struggled with the idea of having to manage species, other species, because I find, just like we've done this with African Americans, just like we've done this with Native Americans, just like we do this with anything, any culture, we usually try to solve the problem, but not have the people at the table. Like, I was watching Stamped from the Beginning, which is also a documentary film on Netflix, highly recommend it. And they show, you know, the formation of this country with all these white people in the room to write the Declaration of Independence. And yet there's no one else. There's no women at the table. There's no African Americans at the table. They were all enslaved. There's no natives. There's no, you know, all white men. So we did the same thing with any, you know, any species. And there's this section on this book. It's on page 65. It says, the assumption that any population needs an external control, a predator or human manager to prevent it from overrunning the earth, is still with us in the way we talk about deer today. Then and now, we picture ourselves as the last line of defense against a threat of brimming I'm not going to say this, I'm not going to say the word right. Fecundity. Hopefully I said that. Sorry. You all can say it along with me. Yet, what species has burgeoned more rudely with deeper repercussions than humans? So, and that's a stage 65. So by the time, you know, Erica has gotten to that part, you know, we've kind of gotten a sense about how things are going. But she talks about a lot of different ways. She talks about people that rescue deer. She talks about people that hunt deer. She talks about hunting as a way that actually was a way to continue the threat of racism in this country, because hunting actually really became a white man's sport. And many people, even though African Americans, we're going to talk about natives in just a second, but even though African Americans would really like to hunt, many times they don't even feel safe to get to the places where they can legally hunt, because they're crossing land that's owned by white people who may not even allow them. So even the way that deer were, even deer hunting has threads of racism in it. What I also really found interesting was she goes way back into like the 1500s, maybe even earlier than that. And in in Europe, those people that owned land used to create deer parks. So for a resource, a food resource that was available to everybody, a certain group of people would fence off their land so that the resource was within their boundary. And then the people who lived outside the boundary, who ended up becoming paupers because they could no longer feed themselves because they didn't have access to deer, that became a thing. Which then, when those Europeans came over here, Native Americans had access to deer, and the deer had access to forests. And the European settlers decided to take down the forest. They also took out the deer. So we left a whole group of people without food or the means to even shelter, and even the means to clothe themselves. And we exported so many deer. As European settlers, we exported so many deer from this continent over to Europe. Buckskin became a fashion trend over there. And when we did that, not only did we absolute decimate the deer population on the settlement part of the United States, so it would have been like the original colonies in the Carolinas and whatnot, we also changed the way that Native American culture worked. So most of the time, it was the women in Native American cultures that would tan the hides, and in addition to their other roles. When deer buckskin became such a fashion rave, and we were transporting like thousands and thousands of deer all the time, like every month overseas, that put Native American women to work just on that task. And the other tasks, as far as farming, agriculture, gathering, things like that, that all fell to the wayside. So we began to really impact cultures just from this one little drop in the bucket, if you will, just one deer. And the other thing is that because we also decimated the herd so much, as we were decimating them, there was exploration going west, and they found more deer, because we had this belief that this place was like our breadbasket, and it was up to us to like conquer it because it was abundant and it was all for us. And so we thought, said God, that's what we thought. So anyways, but when we decimated those herds, we actually captured deer from Michigan, Wisconsin, and other places in the Midwest, and transported them to the East. And in doing that, this is what's really kind of interesting. In doing that, we picked up a deer from, let's say, Michigan, who's used to eating cherries, apples, whatever, all the things that are here, and having the certain water sources, knowing where things are. And by the way, deer teach other deer through the matriarchal lines, just like mule deer, just like elephants too. So we pick up a deer from like Michigan, who's used to these patterns, this migration, these food sources, these water sources, this terrain. We pick them up, we move them to a completely different place, like, Carolina, different food, different water, different migration paths, different terrain. And so then we have like, and not even to mention the fact that from moving deer now even, but even back then, would have been an incredibly suffering experience for the deer. And we didn't even pay any attention to that. So mindfulness again, or mindlessness again. So there's a lot of information in this. Some of it's infuriating, but for me, what really just made me think about it is that every action that we take, every single one, and I'm just talking about me as Julie, the person, every single action that I take does have a consequence and a ramification. So when I take a walk in the nature preserve with Lucas, how can I be mindful of my footsteps? How can I be mindful of the deer around me? How can I, what is it? Leave only footprints, take only pictures and leave only footprints. That's a mantra to move forward when dealing with deer and thinking about what all we have done, what all we can do, because in the deer, actually, to me, is also a message of hope, because it does, when we look at this, just this one species, and there's, I've got books, I'm looking at my bookshelf over here, books on so many other species, but if I think of my impact on this planet, I am not the ruler of this planet, right? My species is not the ruler of this planet. We are all connected. We are all one. We are all here on a living, breathing organism called Earth. How I contribute, what mark I leave, how I impact, all makes a difference. And I just need to be aware of it. And the animals, what I find so super cool with this book, and also my interaction with animals, the animals keep trying to bring us back to that point, indeed. So I hope you have a chance to read The Age of Deer. Highly recommend it. It's not very big, as you can see. Those are my little markers because I took a ton of notes. But just be mindful of that. Even think about how you plant your garden and what you are okay that they take and what you're not. And even what plants are indigenous to your area and what are not, because plants that are not indigenous to this area can be toxic to them. So how can you be mindful about how you live on this planet? And you can look to the deer for guidance on that. Again, The Age of Deer. Sorry, it keeps reflecting from the window that's in front of me that looks out on the nature preserve where all the deer live and come and visit every single night. But how can you be mindful? So if you do read the book, please let me know what you think. I would love to have a further conversation about this. In the meantime, just think about how to be mindful when it comes to deer. And I've got probably more to say on that too. It's because they're also always right outside my window, but I'll come back to that later. So let me know what you think. Take really good care of yourself and just be mindful. Take only pictures and leave only footprints. And pick up your dog poop when you go out for walks, because that's what Lucas and I are doing too all the time, picking up other people's dog poops. But take only pictures and leave only footprints. Take really good care of yourself, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here.